Hey everyone, Nate the Feral Painter here, and welcome to the video. It's been a while since I've even got round to making a video and uploading and all that sort of good stuff. So I just want to briefly mention what's been going on, why I've not been uploading and all that sort of stuff, just before we jump into video, because I know a lot of my regular viewers and stuff will probably have been wondering where's he been. And you'll know that around Christmas time I put a public post up saying that, you know, I've been having some quite significant health issues at the moment, and that's still ongoing. I'm in between like treatments and stuff like that. So due to the type of treatment I'm having, it's knocked me for six. I'm not going to lie. I've been quite ill. I am going to be fine. I've got a long road ahead, but you know that's the reason for the lack of uploads. You know, health and family and all that sort of stuff come first. But this video is just really me. I've not really been sat at my desk for a while, and I just wanted to do something a little bit fun, a little bit of a passion project, not painting my typical style, and just literally come on, have a bit of fun, show you how I've done it, what I've painted it like, and just show you some alternative things that we can go into. So with all that out of the way, let's jump straight into it. So this again is obviously from my favourite chapter, which I've just converted a Dark Angels Marine. Now with this I love using, I think people in the community call them Sigmarines or something, so it's like the Age of Sigmar Marines. These are really good because they've got that knightly aesthetic, and you can convert them up and turn them into some pretty cool stuff. It's just a case of working your way around and chopping off all the iconography of that original model so that it's like a nice blank slate that we can build upon, and then all we've got to do is just make it a little bit more sci-fi, a little bit more 40k-ish. So I've obviously gone through and I've attached some swords and everything from the Dark Angels Inner Circle Companions kit. I've got a Horus Heresy backpack on there, and I'm just working my way around, just applying different things and just experimenting. There's a lot of sanding and things like that involved as well. Another great way I love to make things a little bit more sci-fi and 40k-ish is you can always turn to like pipes and wires and all that sort of good stuff. And this is just a good way to suggest that something's got a little bit more technology about it. And just using a pipe and tentacle roller kit from Green Stuff World, I just laid out some little sausages, run it through the little device, and then that was pretty much it. Just drilled some holes and filled them in. I'm using a little bit of putty here just to smooth things out, as though this is some sort of tabard that's going to have some like scripture on and prayers. And I'm just experimenting with shoulder pauldrons I had lying in my kit box, and just so I can kit bash and just have a little bit of fun with it. I did add some skulls and candles as well. These are also available from places like Games Workshop and Green Stuff World do the candles. One thing with the candles, a little tip I always do, is I got some UV resin because they just sort of glue on. And real candles will be dripping down with wax, so I just got a little bit of UV resin. You can do this with super glue as well, so I don't think you've got to go out and get some like UV resin, but just get a little bit of super glue on a stick or a pin or a paper clip and just drag it down, and this will just help blend it in to that surface, but also create an actual 3D texture that will actually look, and when we've done painting, will result in some candles dripping down those skulls. So yeah, basically this Marine was from the Age of Sigmar kit, and I've just gone around and removed all the iconography and just played around and stuck some 40k parts on it. I'll try and put everything in the description below just for people that maybe want to replicate or join in. And at this stage I've just worked my way around and added a couple of scuffs and dinks to that armour. So to start the painting process, I have primed this miniature up in the Kaleido Colorworks Matte Black Primer. These are some new primers that I've recently been using over the past few months, and they are by far my favouriteest and the best primers that I've ever come across. Now I wanted to do a chipped effect on this armour. I'm going to be turning to chipping fluid for this. I just prefer the way that they look. So I've gone on there and sprayed some rinox hide as well on the miniature. You can stipple this on or paint it if you've not got an airbrush. And I'm actually now going through and dry brushing on some metal. Now I don't want a load of rust around this miniature. It's not going to be heavily rusted. It's going to have a slight bit of rust in, and I know ceramite doesn't rust before someone jumps in comments, but I'm having fun here and I'm just working my way around. Now the reason I'm doing a dry brush of a metallic colour or a metallic steel colour over the top of it is so that when I have chipped through, it's going to have that brown undertone, which is going to suggest either some primer from the painting process of the armour, or even, you know, just some of the earliest forms of rusting. And this little metal part will just save a little bit of time going back through later with all that chipping effects and stuff, and it'll just show a little bit of this coming through in those chips as well, just adding further to that effect when you look at the closer inspection of it. So now what I'm going to do is, once I've completed that initial like base coat or undertone layer before we move into the armouring, I'm going to go ahead now and apply 2 thin layers of the AK heavy chipping fluid. Now what chipping fluid is, so we've got this base coat on first of all, then the chipping fluid, and then we're going to put the paint over the top of it. But what the chipping fluid does, once it's like dry to the touch, it acts as a barrier between the base layer, which is like the rust tone, the rust base coat that we'll call it, and the actual paint layer. Now once your paint on top is dried, what that allows us to do is come in with some water, which will reactivate that chipping fluid and remove that top layer, revealing the layer underneath, giving us some instant chips. Now another way you could do this, if you want to skip a bit later on into the video, once I've done like the actual green armor, you could just sponge chip this on, but I just prefer to do it this way, and it's an enjoyable process. But some tips I can give you around the actual chipping fluid is, it does have a working time with this. You know, you've got to be not fast, but you've got to be very careful of how you approach it. So I just go on there and apply 2 thin layers of that, and then we're not going to use heat to dry it. You'll either let it dry naturally for around 15 minutes and it'll have almost like a satin sheen to it. That's when you know it's finished. Or you can just use the air from your airbrush to actually finish and just dry it along. Now, once that's dry to the touch, we can now go ahead and paint the actual colour of the armour itself. Now, I know this is a Dark Angel, and I know I don't typically paint my Dark Angels in the Dark Angels green colour. It's a little bit muted and a little bit too dark for the colour that I like. I like my Dark Angels to be more of a similar colour to that, but it's more of a darkish, greenish blue, turquoisey colour. Very much similar and akin to the Lionel Johnson 40k model. I love the way that's done, where it's really dark and black and it's got like the Sons of Horus green, but I've adapted this one a little bit as well. So just through my airbrush, I'm just going ahead and applying this Ionic Scaly green. It's a perfect base coat colour. It's very similar to Lupercal green, it's just got a tint more of a blue in there, and there will be some colour alternatives to this from other brands. Most colours and paint ranges do have the similar colours for that. So I'm just going around in thin layers, just building it up and applying this to the armour sections. I'm not worried about any overspray sections because that chipping fluid will act as a mask, so we can almost wipe it away once we've actually completed this process. But once I'm happy with that base layer and the first layer that I've applied, I just mixed in a very small amount of white for my highlights, and I just placed these onto the highlighted points, such as the top of the shoulder pauldrons, a little bit onto his chest and backpack, and then a little bit on the mask as well. I always go slightly, just a tiny little bit brighter than what I want the finished result to look like. This is because during the weathering process, we're going to knock back that highlight a little bit, and it'll just blend in seamlessly, and it'll not look too bright. So if it does look bright on the actual camera itself, don't worry about that. That's done purposely. Now, once that's dried, again, do not use heat for this to dry. With this AK chipping fluid, you get around 40 to 60 minutes of working time before it's pretty much, you can't really do anything with it. So I'm just going to use the air from my airbrush again to dry it. Now, this is where the fun stage happens. And again, this is you'll start to pick this up because it's a very lenient process. You've got to be very careful with how much water you apply. You can actually soak it in water if you really wanted to, but it's the pressure and everything. So I just start off with a nice soft brush dipped in water, and you can either spritz the model with your airbrush with water just to start that activation process. And just very lightly, I'm just going to start to brush, and don't think, you'll start brushing and nothing happens, and then all of a sudden, bang, you'll get this big chip that comes off. So it's better off to work very slowly first of all and start to brush off and just add your little chips. Another great tool that you can use is something like an airbrush needle or a paper clip to add some additional scratches, or a miniature that's really small like this. It'll just help you scrape away those edges, and that's sort of what we're going for with this. Some of the areas, because I've not done it for a while, and maybe I've gone overboard a little bit, that's not a problem. You can just apply that little bit more paint. But this is why I know there's a few extra steps, but when I'm just doing a fun piece like this, I don't mind spending that little bit more time. It's maybe not something you do if you're army painting, or if you've got like a special character, you might use it on that. Just work your way around adding those chips, and then when you're done, that's when you can hit it with a blow dryer, and that'll just seal and lock everything into place. Now moving on to some of the fabric sections, especially the little tabard and the capes and everything like that he's got. And for this, I've just literally, I blacked it out first of all, just using some black paint, and then using AK rubber black and AK neutral grey, and mixing these paints together just to slowly start to stipple and build up the texture on that fabric. So that's the sort of effect I'm wanting. I didn't want to spend ages on these fabric sections, just wanted it to be really quick and easy, but also generate some shadows, highlights, and a little bit of texture, hence why I'm using that stippling technique. So I painted it in black, and then I stippled my way around with the AK rubber black, just stippling it on and thinning it a little bit with water just so I can control the marks. And then I added a tiny little bit of that neutral grey to there, and again just came back in and stippled it onto the brightest points. And then as just one final little addition, I just use your standard dry brushing technique just to fill that in as well. Now another way you can do it, especially a little bit more controlled way for like the bleachy white coloured tabards, I turned first of all to AK Grim Brown. I like to start off with like a brown base, and then I built up just in the same way that we've done. You can either stipple these on, or in this case I used some more of like horizontal lines, just building up those highlights as we went up with Dragon Fang from Two Thin Coats, and then finally a highlight of Vampire Fang. And this was just applied in almost like a scratchy horizontal lines, and this will just suggest that it's almost like a linen fabric, and then this is where we can start to add all the prayers and things like that on. So at this point now, once we've painted all the fabric and obviously all the armor and all them, you can go ahead if you want to apply some decals to your miniature. I'm using the Heresy Dark Angels decals kit, and this was just using the traditional method of microsol and microset. And then once they're dry, I just sealed them in with a little bit of satin varnish. And once all that is dried, we can now move on to painting the metallic sections. This includes all the silver metallic areas like his sword and some machinery, and then also going into that gold trim as well. I typically go over this in most of my videos, but my favourite recipe for silver metallics is a dry brush of Iron Warriors, and then giving it another dry brush over the top as a highlight with something like Stormhost Silver or a really bright silver as well. Now the reason I like to use dry brushing for this is just the way that the end results and the finish looks. It creates these tiny little microscopic marks and little scratches that work perfectly for that like brushed metal look, and because we've got a bit of that brown underneath with some black as well, that'll show through and just suggest some aging along the way. Now the golden trim, this was given a base coat of Pro Acryl Bronze, and now I know I'm mentioning bronze, but it's more almost like a warm undertone colour for the gold that we're going to apply over the top. And then they were just given a dry brush and a highlight of Scale 75's Peroidot Alocomy. And that's pretty much it. There's no special recipes or anything for the metallic sections. Those little effects on their own with the dry brush and everything, it'll sell the effects and make everything look good. And because we've got those undertones of that Pro Acryl Bronze as well, that'll really help that process along. Moving on to the skulls now, and again this is just a really quick stippling process first of all, just to build up a little bit of mottling and texture along with those skulls. And they were first given a base coat of Two Thin Coats Dragon Fang, and then I just build up those highlights with a little bit of AK Deck Tan, But because we've got those white candles above and we need to keep those a little bit separate, what I do then is I come in with just some white, and I always find that the Pro-Acryl Bold Titanium White is the best, and I just base coat my candles out in that white, and then I also go in where we added those 3D little candle drips. First of all, I go in and manually paint those little drips as well, just to finish all that off. Now moving on to a section, and I really enjoy painting flesh, and it can be quite hard to do, but it can also be fun at the same time. So I'm just using 3 colours here. So I'm going to start off with a base coat of Bugman's Glow, and this is just going to be our initial base coat colour. So I'll just coat the entire area, and that makes sure it's nice and opaque. And then with these next 2 colours as my highlights, I'm just going to start adding a little bit to that Bugman's Glow at a time. So I add a little bit of Kislev Flesh to that Bugman's Glow and add a layer. But when I'm applying it in, again, that scratchy, that dotted way. And now this does 2 things. One, it's going to sell the overall look that his skin's a little bit aged and mottling and make it look dirty as though he's been through battle and stuff. But it's also going to help us control, because we're only tapping, we're not trying to get strokes or anything into there. It's almost a really good way of being accurate. And each highlight that I go up, I'm paying more attention to those highlighted points, like the top of his head, because he's got no hair, so that's going to be quite shiny. And then obviously like his eyebrows, nose, and a little bit of his cheekbones, right up until my final highlight of Flayed 1 Flesh. Now, if you do make any mistakes along the way, these can easily be corrected by going back down, or if you want to make certain areas a little bit darker, just go back to your previous colour. And then just to add some little sore spots around like bolts or under his eyes, I just went in there with a little bit of a wash of Citadel's Berserker Bloodshade. And that's pretty much the painting process and the acrylic layers of this model finish. Now we can expand upon this a little bit more and move on into some weathering. Now with weathering, I like to use the enamels because we can reactivate them and we have a little bit more control, and I just prefer the finish and the look that these give you. Now, as an additional contrast or a unifying wash, I'm first going to turn to Villainy Ink Decrepit Filth. Now this is very much, people who are typically used to using like your Citadel washes and stuff. It's a little bit similar to Nun Oil, but it's just 10 times better. It's got a little bit of it's a very dark brown, almost black. So it's as though someone's got a little bit of Agrax Earthshade, mixed a bit of Nun Oil in there. But it's perfect for this because, one, it's going to add some contrast to the miniature and also suggest some darker grime effects to that model as well. Now these are mineral spirit based, so they're not like, you don't use water or anything with them. So once everything is dry around your model, I just literally go in and coat those areas and just a nice even wash across the model and just apply that decrepit filth liberally all over the model. Now I did want a bit of variation in that grime, especially on the skulls and some of the other areas, and for this I've turned to Villainy Ink Goons Grime. Because we've got quite a dark armour, that's why I've used the decrepit filth, because it's darker and it's going to show up a little bit better. But places around the bottom and, like I said, the skulls and stuff, I'm just going to turn more to a general grime effect. And there's nothing wrong with letting these 2 enamels mix with each other on the actual model itself. If anything, I actively encourage that you do that, because then you'll get some unique colour and grime effects. Now, once we've applied that Goons Grime and the Decrepit Filth, we need to give it around 15 minutes, or just grab a blow dryer and that'll help up flash off those mineral spirits and speed up that process. Now, it'll look a little bit unusual once you've applied this, and unlike your typical washes and stuff. So what we can do now is grab something like a Q-tip or a sponge, or just even your brush, and we can come back in with a tiny little bit of mineral spirits on that tool and reactivate that enamel and pull it back off the model. Now, a lot of people just think you can just go on and pull it back off, but what we actually need to do is just be a little bit more controlled with that. Now, you can just dab away at it and it will pull that enamel back off, especially the raised areas and details that you don't really want it on. But we can also blend it, so like places like the shoulder pauldrons, if you want a little bit of that grime coming up, you can flip to your dry end, and where it's reactivated, you can just start to dab and gently transition and feather that effect out. And it's a lot easier than glazing, and it's a hell of a lot easier than spending hours and hours. You can pretty much do this in a few moments. Now if you do want to turn some into some streaks, I switch to a brush and just pull them down and add some streaks. But it's almost like you're working your way back around the model, cleaning it up and moving that enamel to where you need it to be. I'm making sure that it's, it's in the deep recesses, that's where grime would naturally settle, but also ensuring that, we've got some nice fades and transitions across the model. And then hit it with the blow dryer again, and once that is dry, that's pretty much that little section done. You can see how fast this would be. So these enamels and stuff are really good if you've got an army, you want them to look grim and dark. You could just very quickly go on and coat it all on there, not worry about how it's pooling or anything, because you can just go back in and reactivate and pull that enamel back off. Now, the last thing I added to this miniature, and this is a part of it that I weren't fully happy. I don't think it really solved the effect, but, looking back at it, I wish I'd have done things a little bit different, which I'll go over in this video. Now, I did want quite a strong, like, warmish glow effect coming from his power sword, and to achieve this, I first went in with my airbrush and airbrushed some white ink or just some white paint, just to make things a little bit brighter around that brightest point. Once that's dried, I then came in, you can use any, so if you want a different colour, you can just go out and pick up a different colour if you wanted it blue, or you can even use contrast paints. But what I've got is this Radiation Glow from Army Painter, and this is like a special effect. It's really like neon-y and bright, which is perfect for what I want. And I just went in there and sprayed over those sections, and that's pretty much where I left it. Obviously I did get a bit of overspray, but this is fine. It does look a little bit like a glow effect, which is it's shining onto his armor sections. You can do that if you feel to, but I've left it at this point. But what I wish I'd have done is maybe come back in with something like a red contrast paint, and just on the edges, just to dull it down and knock it back a little bit, or even turn to some yellow. And this would have been more like a heat glow effect, and this is something I'll probably cover a little bit later on in time to go over this effect. But it works for this. It works as a quick tabletop standard if you're after something really fast. But I wish I'd probably spent a little bit more time on this section, but hey, we all make mistakes. Now, the final thing I did add to this miniature, and I know the comment section's gonna go wild once I mention that I did add some Dirty Downs rust to some of those chipped and turned some into some streaks. I know ceramite doesn't rust, but I just prefer that look. I just like how the model looks if it's got a little bit of rust to it. I think it gives it a little bit of character and adds a little bit to it. You can skip this step if you don't want that on your miniature either. And that pretty much brings us to the end of this video. Now, you're probably wondering about the base that this is on. It may look like a custom base, but it's actually a base from an old model that I had, which is the Horus Heresy Magnus the Red model. I've just altered it very slightly and just painted it up. And it was quite an easy process to paint this. It's probably the fastest base that I've ever done. So I started off with a black primer. And now this is going to be unusual, but I came in with a very dull dark blue, and I gave those areas a full coat of that dark blue, and then over the top of that I just airbrushed some AK deck tan. Now you can go back in there as well with a deck tan after, just to give everything a dry brush, just to pick out some of those details. And then if you want to grab a contrast paint or some browns, I just went in and just manually sprayed some browns just very quickly, and this will just act as a dusting effect. And then to weather it, I used the exact same enamels as what I used on the miniature, tying it into its base and making everything look like it's in the same environment. And the legs were pinned, and I just glued it in there. And it's a display base, or you can take it off because these bases come apart and have it as a display base. And that pretty much brings us to the end of this video. Now, I know it's been a quick and a different one. It's not really a tutorial as such. I just want to, have a bit of fun. I like editing, I like painting, and this is what this video were for me. I needed a bit of time to chill, relax, and just enjoy it, what it is that I'm actually doing. So I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something from it. Again, there are some affiliate links in the description below if you want to pick up some of these models, some of the paints, and like the airbrush and everything. There's some affiliate links, and I just get a little bit of a kickback from that, and it helps me grow and support me as a channel. But the best way that you can support me as a channel is just hit that like button on this video. It helps me get this video out there, notice, leave me a comment as well. It helps the algorithm. And if you're new to this channel, or you've never, a lot of you do return and watch from analytics that I can see, but you're not subscribed, just take 1 second. It only takes a second. Just flip your phone around or whatever device you're watching this on and just hit that subscribe button. It'd really make me happy. But I've been Nate the Feral Painter. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% when the next video is going to come out. I've got a couple of review videos coming on like some 3D printers and stuff that have been sent. I have got a lot of interesting stuff planned for the future. And if you do want to see some more of my work, then you can always head over to the grimdarkcompendium.com, because I work alongside those guys, where we've got their YouTube channel, and obviously you can go out and check out some of the courses as well on their website and grab some of the Villainy ink bundles for yourself as well. So I've been Nate the Feral Painter, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I just want to say, returning back to the beginning of this video, a massive thank you for all the support and everything over the entire time, but especially during this little dark period that I'm getting through. But I'm doing good, I'm fine, I'm back, we're painting. Might be a little bit slow, but we'll get there. And as always, guys, I've been Nate the Feral Painter, and I will catch you in the next video.